Sorry, a bit excited. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I am Lieutenant Nathaniel Flint of the Landship Scorpios, but today I am honored by Jamie Perkins, the new designer of Rivet Wars Reloaded at Steamforged Games. I am so honored and so excited that you took time out of your day to come and talk with me today.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here. So thank you for having me on.
No problem. So I do have a few questions that we put together. Let's get right into these. So the first one is on a personal level. What attracted you to Rivet Wars?
So on a personal level, for me, Rivet Wars is a game that I've been a fan of even before it sort of came into my professional sphere. So just a little bit of background on me. I've been at Steamforged Games for about 6.5 years now.
Mm,
And I've been a game developer for that entire time, moving more towards what we call being a product owner in more recent years, which is kind of like leading projects, so becoming more and more senior. But even during that time, kind of just as in my hobby time for board gaming and tabletop gaming, Rivet Wars was always a game that kind of caught my attention. I played a few times, and I've tended to focus a lot more on sort of heavy miniature games, so Games Workshop background or War Machine, those kinds of games. And
mm,
as a miniatures gamer and someone who enjoys strategic board games like your Forbidden Stars or Twilight Imperium, your Rivet Wars is a perfect middle ground between those two. And if someone is either a miniature gamer or a tactical board gamer, then or a strategic board gamer, then Rivet Wars is a really great gateway to go either way, if that
mm.
makes sense.
I
And as someone
agree.
that natively enjoys both those kinds of games anyway, it was just kind of perfect for me. It kind of fit the perfect middle of a Venn diagram that I didn't even know was there. So yeah, like you say, like I would hope you had a similar career. Like for you, were you kind of a board gamer or a miniature gamer first, or and then kind of
Oh,
into Rivet Wars,
I
or
fell into Rivet Wars. I was a steampunk, and
yeah,
I was at TempleCon, which was a big board gaming convention that steampunks kind of took over. So they kind of did a half and half. It was an amazing event, and they were doing Rivet Wars demos there, and
right,
it was easy to pick up. I mean, the demos were 5 to 15 minutes, so I was able to spend a decent amount of time there. I was able to talk to the crew, and eventually ended up leaving with a copy. After that,
yeah,
it was sold. Like, I absolutely loved it. The gameplay was amazing. It gave me a lot of RTS feels and things of that nature, and it
absolutely,
on the whole was much cheaper to get than something into like Warhammer or something that has a lot of
yeah,
cost barriers. Meanwhile, Rivet Wars, I got the base set and had technically two armies to play with anyone. I didn't have to get someone else to also put down like $100, and then it just took off. Watching Kickstarters get fulfilled a little bit over time, having severe FOMO and missing the first Kickstarter, I just
sure,
kind of
sure.
fell in love from that.
So I might have been at Tampa at the same time as you. I've been to Tampa before playing War Machine, so you never know. It might have been there at the same time. But
Maybe.
but from that being a steampunk inspired game, hence being a TempleCon, that's also kind of what grabbed me about Rivet Wars is the aesthetic of what's going on there. The mechs walking around, how they're not modern day technology, not quite modern day
Mm,
technology, somewhere in between. Some nice anachronism going on there that's interesting, and the from a mechanical perspective, the simplicity of you don't have to spend a lot of time deploying this whole army and writing an armor list. You put your miniatures to the side of the table, you start playing, you set up your game board to play with, and then you
mm.
start deploying units. You're immediately into the thick of it. And if a few turns into the game, you've kind of just done your deployment as you're throwing units on turn after turn after turn. And it builds up in a really nice sort of heavy snowball momentum way. So there's so much to love about the game, and it kind of gripped me immediately.
Mm. That might lead into the second one, which is on a professional level. What
Yeah.
attracted Steamforged Games to the Rivet Wars IP, and then what kind of like what was those first steps like trying to get a hold of the IP and deciding to move forward? How did that all go?
So there's a couple of different parts to that question to unpack.
Mm,
One is the force of nature that is Ted Terra Nova is an undeniable part of that question. And to this day, even though he's not actively working on Rivet Wars Reloaded, this is a man who just loves Rivet Wars. Like he lives and breathes the game, and he is even during the periods of the game when it's been a little bit quieter, and obviously it's been a long time since the original Kickstarter.
mm,
He's someone that's been active in terms of trying to make sure that somewhere, someday, some kind of more Rivet Wars content is going to get out there into the world. And we've been in contact with Ted Turnover on and off, professionally, personally, for a reasonable amount of time. And he's someone that had quite a lot of respect for the way that Steamforged Games manages and releases games. I think we've got actually a direct quote from him in our initial press release to kind of say how much trust and faith he has in us in how we release those games and how happy he is for us to take Rivet Wars forwards. So there's that kind of personal connection there with Ted Turnover, and also Steamforged Games as a company has been looking more towards not only just releasing our own games and working with video game licenses, but also in terms of trying to find games out there that it's a difficult world trying to release board games right now, tabletop games, because you've got difficulties with shipping costs and manufacturing costs. Things are getting more expensive all the time. Games where we recently ran the Euthia Kickstarter, where that was another game that was struggling, another game company was struggling a little bit. We came in to assist. We've kind of taken that back to Kickstarter and helped them be more successful than they could have been, than they were the first time around. A bit different with Rivet Wars because it's not as if it kind of needed help. It's been a game that's been around for a long time, was successful the first time around, but this is a game that we feel has a lot left to give. It's got a very big potential future. We have a lot of plans for Rivet Wars, not only with this Kickstarter, but potentially beyond this Kickstarter as well. And we really want to see that potential realized. So combination of the accessibility, being able to talk to Ted Turnover and get access to the game itself, also just see an opportunity with it. And we just love the game, honestly. Like, we think there's a lot to it.
So we have Rivet Wars Reloaded. Everything we've seen so far is an amazing first step into bringing Rivet Wars back into the public eye, back to the fans. And a big part of that is the Nemoans, which is the new third faction. So why don't we just kind of snowball into letting you go off on Rivet Wars Reloaded and the factions, like how you approached everything, and I'll just stop talking. Excited.
There's a big answer to that. This might take me a while, and I also might need to. I have this thing sometimes when I can get down a rabbit hole of a question, and I might forget what the initial question was. So bear that in mind as I go through this. So, in terms of deciding what we wanted to do with the game when we realized we were going to have a potential to do something with its future, is we want to talk about what was going to happen, think about what was going to happen with it, narratively and thematically, as well as what we want to do with the game mechanically. Now, from a mechanical perspective, Rivet Wars is a sound game. Like, we have made improvements, what we think are improvements and modernizations to the engine, which we can get onto a little bit later. But there's not a huge amount there. This game will still be fundamentally recognizable to those who've played it before. And that's very key for us, is to make sure that people have played the game. This doesn't feel dramatically different. It still feels like Rivet Wars should feel. From a narrative perspective, we wanted to do a couple of fun things with it, which will lead into some of the sort of the bigger plans for the future for the game. Some of that I can't talk about as much because we want to kind of focus on what's going on in this Kickstarter for the time being, but it does play into the narrative for the game. So the Nemoan faction is representative of where the Blight and the allies come from already. We understand that war has been raging for a long time. The narrative that you're going to read about Rivet Wars Reloaded is actually going to be effectively a continuation of the narrative from the original game. It's like one of the opening lines to the story, for example, is it's been X number of years. I think it's been 8 years or something, which is intended to be a nice mention of the original Kickstarter. Like, it's been this amount of time since the war since you last heard about this. This is where we are so far. The story has advanced. And the Nemoans are a faction that come in as what we describe as morally grey. They're not necessarily allied to the Allies or to the Blight. They're here with their own intentions, which start off as being not really entirely sure why they're here. They just kind of quite literally burst from the ground at different points and have decided to come and combat different people for different reasons. Now, and they're not being particularly forthcoming with their reasoning for being here. They're just kind of appearing, they've got their own objectives and they're trying to meet with them. And they don't really make a huge amount of sense to the Blight or the Allies. They just kind of look at them going, "We're not really sure what's going on with you, and we can't really predict where you're going to come from because you're underground. So we're just going to kind of try and kind of ignore you and carry on what we're doing." But they become progressively more and more difficult to ignore. So what's going on with that is I'm going to dig a little bit into the narrative that we're going to be playing with here, which is that as the war is progressing, it's not going particularly well for the Blight. The Allies have started to get the upper hand, and that's making the Blight more and more desperate and turning to more and more dangerous technology that they don't fully understand. And it's because of that technology that they're tapping into that's going to lead to something that's going to happen later on in the story. You'll find out. And it's to do with the technology that they're using and not using correctly that the Nemoans are concerned, and they've decided we can't wait this out any longer. They've been under the ground for a very long period of time, just kind of watching and not really wanting to intervene, but they've decided they can't stay on the sidelines any longer.
I mean, that all makes sense. I'm so excited to hear everything I'm hearing. Like, so with this third faction coming out, why don't we talk about how did you approach their design? Let's go with visually first. Like, they do stand out from the other two factions that we've seen so far, as well as fitting right in with the world of Rivet Wars, like really well. Do you want to just kind of go off on where you took inspiration, what your thought process was when designing them?
Absolutely. So it was such a fun part of the process working on Rivet Wars Reloaded, is just designing the narrative behind the Nemoans and the visual style behind them as well. So we wanted to make sure that they seemed like they fit in the same world as the Allies and the Blight. Like, it made sense they were from that place. I'm really glad that comes across, by the way. However, we wanted to also make sure that they would seem a step or two more advanced with their technology. This plays into both their narrative as a faction and also their play style. So if you want to think of the Blight and the Allies as our kind of two more, the word I'm looking for, stereotypical isn't the right word, is kind of like, think of them as our benchmark factions. Obviously, they have their differences and their strengths and weaknesses. The Nemoans are going to be a faction that doesn't necessarily play with quite as many miniatures on the table at a time. Perhaps their costs are a little bit different. However, this also means that their per miniature, 1-for-1 with a model from the Allies and the Blight, might mean that they are more powerful. They're a bit more of an elite faction.
Yeah, so they're kind of fitting that role of the more expensive tank in like an RTS, where you're putting out less, but like 1-for-1, they're going to hit harder, they're going to last longer, kind of deal.
Right.
Because they're more about investing in particularly more advanced technologies instead of just trying to push a bunch of people out.
And it fits their culture as well. They're not as many of them as there are of the Allies and the Blight, and of the surface civilizations, as they would refer to it. There's not as many of them. So, and that also plays into their, like I said, their aesthetic, because that means that they can have slightly more advanced technology. It still makes sense at the time. So a term you might want to actually look up is something that kind of heavily inspired the Nemoans, is something called decopunk, where actually that's so it's more to do with initial kind of 1920s mixing with maglev technology, which is why a lot of so I've seen quite a lot of speculation about, do they have ray guns and lasers? No, that's not true. They're actually there. When you get a chance to look at the miniatures from a close perspective, we've tried to make what looks like Rivet Wars, coil guns. So when you look at the weapons in close detail, they'll have this kind of magnetic coils around the parts of the muzzle of the barrel of the weapon, for instance.
Like proto rail guns.
Exactly. Yeah, the technology is slightly different. I actually did look that up, but yeah. And also they have a degree of sonic weaponry, and then also you've seen quite a number of like drill heads on some of the miniatures that you've seen as well. So there's some of that kind of stuff going on there. So they have slightly more advanced technology. They're an elite faction. You also might notice as well that they come up with quite sort of thick armor and coats. That's intended to represent that in the core of the planet, it's warmer than it is on the surface. So they're coming up to the surface and they think everything is freezing, because it's not what they're used to whatsoever. So they come up with quite heavily clad, garb.
Yeah, I definitely got that kind of like Mole Man vibe from some of them.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely good. My fiance used the term, why do they all look like Jawas? They're so cute. And I was like, I can't unsee it now. They got the helmets and the thing. I mean, it just comes across so well. So I also don't think we've said that in the video yet. Real quick, so they are a you've mentioned in other platforms, a Jules Verne-esque like Hollow Earth, like subterranean faction that has kind of brought itself down away from everyone, and now that these decades of war are starting to make them take more notice again.
Absolutely that. Yeah, very, very heavily inspired by those works, as you mentioned.
A lot of people got a little spooked there for the term Kickstarter exclusive faction, and then you guys have kind of put that to rest. I want to make sure that gets said and edited into the video. What does Steamforged Games definition of Kickstarter exclusive look like for Rivet Wars fans?
So this is important because the the Nemoan faction is going to be labeled as Kickstarter exclusive. But as some people have pointed out in the different social groups we've started off with for the game, is that Kickstarter exclusive can have a different definition for different companies working on Kickstarter. It used to mean a very specific thing, and now it means a number of different things. What it means for the Rivet Wars Kickstarter is it's closer to the term web store exclusive, but the Kickstarter exclusive badge and name is more recognizable. People have an understanding of that means something I should look into the detail of. It kind of signals that people need to go and read up more what that means. So for us, that means web store exclusive. So it means that the Nemoan faction will be available to pledge for during the Kickstarter. It also means that when we deliver the Kickstarter and the game goes to retail, that the Nemoans will also be available through the Steamforged Games web store. They'll also be available whenever Steamforged Games is personally present and selling at a show or a convention. So it means that you will always have access to that particular faction, but it'll be through a Steamforged Games web store.
You kind of covered a few questions in one, so let's just jump ahead. Let's go to,
sure.
In your teaser for the Kickstarter, you mentioned new ways to play and mixing up in-game mechanics. Any chance you can go into further detail of those for us?
So we can talk about some of those. Some of that is to do with what you've seen us mention, solo mode. So what we're going to be designing for the game at the moment, what we have designed for the game is a number of AI cards that are faction specific. So if you want to play the game, it's becoming more and more popular nowadays in modern tabletop gaming to play games solo. So we wanted to give players playing Rivet Wars an option to do that. So if you're playing with the Blight or the Allies or the Nemoans against any one of the other two, you will have a set of cards that allows you to play against that faction, and it's just being completely unmanned, which will sort of give you things like a deployment order card. So it will tell you the priority order of which units they're going to deploy, where they're going to be deploying them from, and their behaviors of most of the time probably pushing towards the strategic objectives, but also what kind of targeting they're going to be going for that particular turn. Interestingly, as we were developing that, what was quite funny is we actually slightly overshot the difficulty level of those AI cards first. So the lead developer, a chap I'm working with called Steve Margetson, said, Jamie, I haven't beaten the AI cards yet. So we're going to need to do a little bit more fine tuning, I think, on those. But the system is working very well. So we're quite happy with it. So AI, you can play that. So one of the things that I believe is my colleague Russ Trell said at Gen Con on a different interview, he was talking about, or somewhere else that perhaps I believe was talking about an AI campaign. It's not quite accurate. What that basically means is there is a new campaign that you can play inside the core box with a new advanced storyline. You'll have different scenarios you can play through. Scenarios is definitely something I want to come back to. And you can play with the AI cards playing through that campaign if you want to. You don't have to play that with another person. You can just use the AI cards there. They'll work either when you're playing a standalone game or as part of playing through the campaign. The scenarios is probably another big part of new ways to play, because one of the things that we really wanted to have a look in depth at was the scenarios from the original Rivet Wars. Felt like we could do a lot more with them. They were often quite sort of standardized. It didn't feel like there was a ton of variation between them. It just felt like there was more that could be done there. So we've tried to make sure we mix up the scenarios quite heavily. You still have those older style scenarios where it's just a very large arena you can play in, and we kind of call that a pitched battle. But you also have scenarios which we're colloquially calling, for example, a pipeline. So if you can imagine 3 of your original tiles instead of like 6 or 9, and you're deploying on one end, it's in a line, you're deploying on one end, and the other player is deploying on the other end. And it's kind of a bit of a tug of war, push-pull. So let's say that you've got the Allies on the left and the Blight on the right. And the allied player has pushed forward and taken hold of both objectives because there's 2 on the table. That once that turn has ended, a new tile is placed by the Blight as they've been pushed back. So that gets placed. They have a choice of where they can place that, directly behind or to the side. They get new deployment zones as they're pushed back, as their front line has been pushed back, and the tile that's behind the allies has been pulled up. That's removed as well. So the player's moving towards the sort of the Blight area of the area. So it's kind of like I said, a push-pull scenario. And you can go back in the other direction as well.
Me and my gaming group have been playing this for years. We love to do the sort of like beach landing, and then as things are being taken, move everything aside, add stuff, add little rivet homes, do like a whole pushing towards the fortress at the end to a big like epic finale. A good 6-hour game. Like they are going to go nuts that this is now official like thing. We love this kind of stuff. And it works really well, especially for people who want the games to go a little bit longer. It's a very nice progression and get the feeling of building momentum as you go through it.
Yeah, so playing with that, there's actually two versions of that. There's like a smaller one and a larger one. The larger one probably would take a little bit longer, as you're saying. The smaller one kind of works like your deployment points, as your deployment zones, as you're placing them down. You only have a limited number of them. Say you have like 3 or 4, and you have to place one every time you push back, place a new one. But when you've run out of deployment zones, if you get pushed back again, you've effectively lost. It's kind of like your lives, is how many times you can get pushed back.
Oh, very interesting.
But it also means that you have a push-pull there of how aggressively you want to place those deployment positions, because if you place them too aggressively, say maybe an opponent could stand their units on top of it and you can't deploy from there because it's got enemy units in it. Or you could place it far back and it's safer, but it's also further away from fighting. So things like that, push-pull mechanics. We like giving players challenging and interesting decisions for games like that. And then the larger one, as you say, you can play a bit more of a grand game, as you're saying. Other things that we can do with this kind of new tile placement system is we can do search and destroy style missions where, let's say you're playing as the Allies and you actually have a very large force on the table to begin with, maybe something like 20 deployment points and 5 rivet points or something like that. So a large amount of force, but you're not placing anything new. And as you're going out and discovering new tiles, which are placing small amounts of enemy units, they're trying to sort of pick you off bits and pieces. But every time you lose a model, you're not getting it back. You're having to make your way through to the end of that without losing any. It's like we're trying to retain as many of your forces as possible. So there's some interesting things we can do with dynamic scenarios. And that's just 2 examples.
That's going to make Tom's life a little bit more interesting with his custom scenario maker. It sounds so great. So all right, let's unpack. I've got an off topic. You mentioned being able to place like a little actual deployment zone wherever you want based on this gameplay. Does that mean that'll be a new element? Is a little placeable deployment marker in a grid?
It's a great question. So that dovetails into something else I wanted to bring up, which is we've also got a different size of tiles to play with. So at the moment you have your 3x3 standard tile. They don't really change size. And then you have your bunkers and your objective you can place on top of that. And we've got a higher variety of tiles. So you'll have your standard 3x3s. You'll also have 3x2s and 2x2s. So smaller and different shaped tiles you can place down for different shapes of scenarios. In addition to that, you'll also have a large number, I think it's in the teens, I think, of individual tiles, which will have bunkers. They're double-sided, have a mixture of bunkers. They'll have a mixture of objectives, deployment zones, and they have trenches as well. So you can actually place trenches on top of just regular no man's land spaces.
Will that be different from duck boards? Will be trenches that'll have different rules, or can you?
If I'm being perfectly honest, I understand where the word duckboard came from, but I just personally prefer the word trenches. So think of them as interchangeable.
For most fans it is. It's just I was like, there's a reason why vehicles can go over it and stuff like that. Yep. Like they're not the same thing, but I just wasn't sure if from a gameplay perspective you had something new there drop.
That's fair. So one of the things that's useful about this, having those single tiles, is they don't have to just be placed on top of other tiles. You could place, say, a 3x3 with a gap, and then you could place a 1 tile in the middle, and you've immediately created a bridge scenario. Because you've got a choke point you can play through there, and you can do very interestingly different things with what's going on the game space.
Oh yeah, we definitely have like the cutout of duck boards that are just paper that we've tried to do similar things like that with. So this is that's exciting. So yeah, making the customizable element of scenarios is definitely going way up with basically this new way of dealing with tiles. Wow, that was so much in a little bit. The community's first reaction has been, of course, one of great excitement. I don't think there's anyone who isn't at least a little bit excited. We're so happy there's more Rivet Wars. However, there's a little bit of worry, and I have to ask this question because it was just so prevalent everywhere where there's Rivet Wars, where this news was taken. Everyone wanted to ask, for years we've been waiting on the Ruska and Ottomans. That was the next thing. And a lot of people are now worried that the next thing is Nemoans and Reloaded, that something might have happened or that they're dropped completely. So I know from some of the other places where you've talked about it that this worry is a little bit unfounded. Everyone chill. But I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what can people expect out of those two factions that we've spent years dreaming about as the next thing?
So the short answer to the question is they're not part of the release plan right now for this Kickstarter, but never say never with them. There is nothing preventing us from coming back and reapproaching those factions in the future. And we can as well. We have the option to do so. So at the moment, we're focusing on the contents of the Reloaded Kickstarter, where we want to put back the original game out as it was. We wanted to focus on making the Nemoans as kind of like our personal stamp on the game as well. There's no reason why we couldn't approach those again in the future.
I'm actually going to break this up into two questions. So
sure.
What we have seen is a lot of new colors. So we seem to have red for Blight, blue for allies, and a green for the Nemoans, or a light green. Is there anything you'd like to add to the thought process in recoloring them? Is that an incorrect assumption just based on the teaser images?
No, it's not incorrect. Yeah, we have recolored the plastics, or we will be recoloring the plastics for those factions, and we actually had some. So we have, as well as the pro painted miniatures, I believe we actually had some, because people at Gen Con, we had pro painted miniatures on a display case at the top, and that was where most of the photographs you've seen online have come from. But in the shelf underneath that, it was probably harder to see because it was inside the cabinet. We actually had some miniatures that were just base colored as well, in the base colored faction. So anyway, but yes, the short answer to the question is we are going to be redoing base colors. Now, part of that is because we felt like we wanted to add a little bit more sort of color and vibrancy into the game. If you compare, for example, the original core box face to the recolored core box face that we've got, there tends to be a little bit more color and life to it. And one of the things that we're generally trying to do with Rivet Wars is it was actually a direct question I answered on Facebook on it recently. They wanted to know that we were going to be retaining the sort of the light-hearted elements of Rivet Wars. We absolutely are. And if anything, we're probably leaning slightly more into that, as opposed to sort of like the grim darkness. Like it's ultimately still a war game, but it's going to be taking itself with a little bit more sort of lightheartedness to it as we go forward. And the sort of the vibrancy of the color and the colorization, and that is a considered choice to go in that a little bit more in that direction.
Since there is a large amount of people that are like, oh, this is a good introduction for kids to get into wargaming, and you were like, oh, we're gonna ride that a little more and kind of dial back the darker sides.
I would want to heavily caveat that and say it's not as if we're changing the whole identity of the game. It's I would say it's a very slight adjustment, and it's mainly to do with the visuals. Yes, but
nuance.
I wouldn't think it's
than what I said. Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly.
All right, then. And then part two of this question is, I said, this means in your teaser, we see a new Blight plug, a little red hero plug who looks to be like a propaganda or something. But if we can assume red means Blight, we see a new Blight plug. So I said, should we expect further surprises added to the Blight and the allies coming up in the Kickstarter? Not just brand new Nemoans, but brand new allied and Blight as well?
Yes, is the direct answer to that question. One of the things that we wish was a little bit more in the core box specifically of original Rivet Wars is that we love the plug system. We think it's fantastic, and there's only, if you just play the core box, I think there are only 2 per side as a turret and as a character.
There's only 2 per side, and they basically are a hero or a utility plug.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're looking to do is expand the core experience of Rivet Wars. So a lot of the content that you've got in there is still the same as it was in the previous core box. However, we're looking to slide some of the heavier mechs like the Landkrieger and the Sturmrad and the M7 boss and the vertical tank. They're going to go into the core set to give you a much beefier core experience. In addition to that, we've also added a small number of additional hero plugs for both factions. So these are brand new characters that we've created, and they are also going to go into that core box experience. I'm going to add an extra note here, because I know that I'm mainly when we're talking today, we're mainly talking to existing fans of the game rather than sort of new people to Rivet Wars. So something that people might be worried about there is, if we've got those new hero plugs that are coming into the core box, am I required to go and buy that core box again when it comes to Kickstarter? The answer to that, because it's a bonus question for you, is you're not required to buy that. No, there will be a bespoke returning backers pledge, where if you want to just come in and basically pick up the upgrade kit, which is basically just be like the tiles, new rulebook, new cards, tokens, that kind of thing, won't come in with any miniatures, then you can get that. But with that pledge, you would get those brand new plugs that are in the core box. So you wouldn't be locked behind having to get the core box to get those 3 miniatures. six miniatures. There you go. That's another spoiler for you. Is six new hero plugs that are in the core box. You can get those by getting returning back as pledge. So you've got the choice either there. If you want to get the glowed up miniatures, because we've done obviously a highly processed new detail pass. You've seen some of those miniatures coming out with the wonderful beards and those are kind of bits and high detailed weaponry.
Yeah,
you can get that stuff, but you're not forced into that. It's your choice.
Awesome. Well, while we're on this, I know that's a question I have further down. That's another question people have been seeming to have. I know that not everything is set in stone yet, so there might not even be an answer. But with Kickstarters, we all know that there's like a lower tiered, like, you know, do what you can to help. There's higher tier, someone with a lot of money is trying to get their name in the game or something. And then we know that there's like that middle, like, we understand that it'll cost some money to get a decent chunk or get the experience. A lot of people are asking what they should be, and I guess me as well, is asking what they should be planning on saving or what they should be planning on spending. I wasn't sure if you had a very rough amount for those people of, hey, you should be expecting to do roughly about $100 to basically pre-order things that we are working on, or if you're like, hey, it's a relaunch of the whole basically franchise, you're gonna be expecting to be a little higher than $100.
So I can answer some of this.
Okay.
We're on the run up to the Kickstarter itself. We will be doing a dedicated pledge, a dedicated article just talking about the pledge levels. So talking about what's going to be each one of them. You got a lot of detail on the prices. That's when sort of the official announcement of the prices, etc., will come out. So I'm going to leave that that information for then. But there's some of the stuff I can talk about here, which is you're asking me about whether elements from the original Kickstarter are coming back. Like I've already mentioned some of the wider units, like the M7 boss and the Vert Sternrad, etc. What you can expect is, it's a good vehicle. I love that one. I love my motorbikes. They're so wonderful, whether it's the small or big ones. So what was I going to say now? So content like that. So no, it's fine. So the heavy, like stuff from Heavy Metal, stuff from Battle of Brighton, all of that stuff is coming back. You're going to see air units. You're going to see big mech units. You're going to see a lot of the hero units. Not all of the content from the original Kickstarter is going to come back. Some of the Kickstarter exclusive heroes we're going to be leaning away from, particularly the ones that are kind of based on movie characters. I don't think those are going to be reappearing. And some of that as well, some of those choices have been made intentionally because we want to save ourselves some design space for the future. But okay. The vast majority of that content is coming back, so it will be a sizable Kickstarter. And then you have the Nemoans themselves, who, whilst they don't have one-for-one parity in terms of number of units that are available to the other factions, they're still a big faction, so there's a lot going on there with them. So in terms of this, dovetails a little bit into backwards compatibility, which I've seen as another common question that's come up. So either you have units from the original Kickstarter that are not coming to Rivet Wars Reloaded, you can still play them in Rivet Wars Reloaded. The changes to the game engine are small enough that you could take an old original stat card and it will still play with the new game. So you're not locked out of playing with those units in the new game. We don't want you to have bought a toy that you can't use. Like if you've got something that you really want to play with, we don't want you to play Rivet Wars Reloaded and feel bad that you can't use something from the previous game. So it'll still be backwards compatible. You'll just be using the old card, that's all.
Okay. So we're talking about Kickstarter, we're talking about all these things. So is Rivet Wars Reloaded a just massive core box of the old factions and the Nemoans, or is Rivet Wars Reloaded the kind of like brand where we're going to be getting a new Eastern Front Reloaded? You just mentioned Battle of Brighton stuff. We're getting like Battle of Brighton Reloaded, and then there'll be the Nemoans as their own box as well, with their own, however that is. Basically, people are just asking if it's just one box with everything in it, or if we can expect multiple boxes of different expansions at different levels under the Reloaded brand, if you will.
It's definitely the latter of those two. There's going to be a smaller, say if you take up all the amount of, look at the amount of boxes you got behind you. It would be a smaller number of boxes than you have behind you, but it is more towards the latter of those two. But I would say Rivet Wars Reloaded is the brand. Is a good way to say that.
Okay, all right. So I have a question about the plans to expand terrain tiles for further customization. You talked at great length about that. However, I have little additions of little curiosities. So the original, to show again that darker side of how war churns up the land, the tiles were basically mud and stuff. However, there was talks about having water tiles for like water scenarios or beach tiles for those water scenarios. There's also talk of just kind of getting some visual differences like snow or green or grassy tiles to symbolize like maybe the earlier days of the conflict or a new battle that is taking place in a new area. I didn't know if there was any plans on expanding that kind of like visual aspects, even if it's down the road, like maybe not during this Reloaded push. Sounds like there's already so much going on with it. But I wasn't sure if that was something you guys were maybe looking into, because that's a very simple, relatively cheap buy to completely change the look and feel of your home games down the road.
The nature of the tiles themselves visually is probably going to be quite similar to what you're familiar with. However, the part of what you were saying there is true. That's something to bear in mind for the future. Is that this set of tiles looks this way? That doesn't mean that all tiles released under the Rivet Wars Reloaded brand will look the same.
Okay. Oh wow! What time is it? Oh, we're right in the nose.
I tell you what, if we are running out a little bit low on time, I have something cool to show you. So this is something that
if you have anything to show, definitely.
So I have something to show you. But here's the thing: because the timing of this particular recording, you might not have seen this go out yet. So I'm going to drop a link for you into the chat, and then we can get your reactions on the screen to what's in there.
Oh dear.
So we dropped another blog today that you wouldn't have seen because we've been busy talking, and then you'll probably want to scroll down to the bottom because there's something cool in there.
Oh my! I've already got this right here. Oh wow! Yeah, I'm assuming you mean the unit here.
The comic book. Keep going.
Oh! New stat cards. Look at all this. Oh my gosh! I am absolutely already. You've made my day so much harder. Look at that though.
So this is a super interesting little talking point. So for people that wouldn't necessarily know what you're looking at there, we've released an article today which is showing some more new visuals, and
there will definitely be edited in pictures over my ugly mug.
That's fair. So a new comic book panel. One of the things that we really adore from the original Rivet Wars is the visuals in terms of the art style. So not only just you had the unit imagery, but you had these comic book panels that would show up every now and then to show the units in action, and that comic book artwork was chopped up and used in like action cards and some of the bits and pieces. And we think that's a really wonderful tradition to continue forward. So we took some of our favorite visuals for the Nemoan faction. We've created our interpretation of what we think a newer comic book panel for Rivet Wars focused on the Nemoans would look like, and this is artwork that we're going to be using on, say, brand new action cards, stuff to do with Nemoans specifically, and this stuff that you can expect to see more in the future. Plus, it just looks cool. I think it's just awesome.
No, that was amazing. I was in preparation for this, looking over my old rule book and stuff, and they just sometimes in the rule books it's just a panel that's like, yeah, we're talking about movement, so here's just a panel showing like the rocket cycles in action or whatever, and it's just so nice. There was a lot of talk. I know that they did one for Battle of Brighton, and they did one for the base. There's a lot of talk of just keeping them churning out to get the story or to get ensure the hype keeps moving, and just so much goes into like even what I'm seeing right here, which people will be able to see, such detail that is probably just a lot to ask to keep churning them out if they weren't going towards a project. But I mean, this is so nice to see returning. Like, it looks amazing.
I mean, one of my favorite parts of this artwork is if you look in close at the close-up shot of the driver's goggles, you can see the reflection of the Sturmpanzer in the glass.
Oh, yeah. Way to go. Who's that? We'll give a shout out. Who's the artist, or can you not say at this point?
I can. So we have an in-house artist called Doug Telford. He's done a number of our pieces of artwork over the years for the different games that Steamforged Games make. We are blessed because he's an incredibly talented artist, and he drew up this for us. And he's actually going to be working on the majority of the revised artwork for the new artwork as well for Rivet Wars Reloaded.
Awesome. So you guys were at Gen Con, and it was great, and you guys showed off all these things in person, and all I want to ask is, like, where are you gonna be? What events are coming up within the next year and during and after the Kickstarter where people are going to see Steamforged Games, and more importantly, people are going to see Rivet Wars? Where should people be looking into to go to get that experience of seeing it up close before getting their
Yeah,
pledge?
that is a great question that I am woefully unprepared to answer. Is I know there are some shows that we attend very regularly. So we're always at Gen Con, we're always at the UK Games Expo, we're always at Spiel in Germany. So those three you are at every single year. Then we have attended Nova, we have attended Origins, we have attended Gamma. There's a number of other places. Oh, Gamma, I think we're at every year as well. There's a number of other places that we're at you can expect to see. So but you can expect to see this the diorama that we've had for Rivet Wars appear at our next couple of shows. I can only tell you kind of what we're at mainly. I don't have the list, sadly, so I apologize. I'm less prepared for that question.
Hey, that is fine. We talked a little bit about Kickstarters and Kickstarter exclusives and which kind of things aren't coming back. I wasn't sure if people can expect the whole kind of Kickstarter exclusive neutral units. If you'll just be like, if there's time, we'll make a few nice little neutral units. I know that we talked on the official Facebook group about how there was like Terror Nova and Cruel Mini, who were just like Kickstarter hero units that were very nods at the publishers and at the creators. And you were like, "Oh, I wasn't sure that was a thing that we should do. I wasn't sure if we could expect something."
It wasn't quite that. It was more of a. I was just sat back and went. So the person asked me if there was going to be a minute named after me, and I sat there and thought, nobody's ever asked me that question before. So I was like, I'm going to go and have some conversations with some people. So who knows? But when it comes to the sort of specifics of neutral units, so that's more of a sort of a gameplay question. I can answer that one. So when we were talking about how we were going to come back to Rivet Wars, when we've designed specifically miniature games in the past, we have experimented with mercenary units or neutral units that can go between factions. What we tended to notice is the more factions you add to a game, the more problematic they tend to be for gameplay and for balance. Yeah. So what we've tended to do is either the neutral units they're either part of the units that are not going to be returning to the game in Reloaded, or they have been assigned to a particular faction. So there won't be any dedicated neutral units in Reloaded to start off with.
You know what? That's, in my personal opinion, that's okay. That makes sense. That you're like, balance is already hard enough. Everyone, I mean, at the moment, if the fans get what they want, there would be 5 factions. Balancing those would be crazy. So I understand that it's like, we don't need all these new neutrals throwing a wrench into everything. Like,
well, from a faction, we have a term called faction identity. So that's like what makes the allies, what makes the blight, what's unique about them that nobody else should have thematically, narratively as well, or from a gameplay perspective. So one of the problems that mercenary or neutral units can pose is they can start to blur the lines between what different factions have access to. And it's far more interesting to us to keep faction identity as unique as possible. Like the more factions you add to a game, the more you're going to blur those lines anyway, because you tend to use up more and more design space, etc. So it's important to set yourself some sort of pillars of design early on to try to protect that as much as possible, because you'll eventually get to a point in a game where everyone has access to everything, and it's less interesting than a game which has strong faction identity. If that makes sense.
Yeah, especially with Rivet Wars, where that kind of core thing is it's asymmetric game design. Like, all the factions should have different strengths and weaknesses, and you should be able to like change how you're strategizing as the game progresses. That's completely understandable. Thank you so much for your time and your effort coming in and talk to us today. I want to give you a chance to, if there's anything that we didn't discuss that you think should be talked about or shared or whatever, I mean, feel free. But otherwise, we'll direct them to the official sources, like the Steamforged Games mailing list is a big one everyone's being pushed to for the most up-to-date information on Rivet Wars. You also just launched the new official Facebook community that is run by Steamforged Games. Is there anywhere else we should think about, or?
Yeah, so you can actually, at this point, you can actually follow the Kickstarter page. That's another big one as well. So if you actually Google Rivet Wars Reloaded Kickstarter, that should come up on Google at this point. Or you can find anywhere, either on the Steamforged Games website, the blogs, or on the Facebook pages, etc., on Twitter. Literally anywhere you can find us, you should be able to find links to go and follow the campaign. If you can go on and click follow the campaign, that means you'll be emailed the moment the campaign opens up on September the 6th, and you can be there right on day one with all the rest of us. So that's probably going to be the best place you can get the news.
Yeah, and you'll be joining 920 followers already. Oh, it's such a good sign. I know that I have asked September 6th off. I will be ready. I'm going to be ready for it. And with that, thank you so much for coming on and taking some of your time to talk with me. I have been over the moon. I've been just waiting for this all week, and I'm just very honored that you would come on and talk about stuff so much. I feel like so much confirmed and new stuff, and so much good stuff you've been able to give me today. So I thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. So appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, Steamforged Games mailing list on their website. Check out the official Rivet Wars Facebook group, where they've been very active. That's how I was able to prep so well for this. They've been helping out people. Like, follow, subscribe. Rivet Wars is on many platforms, on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, and they're all active again thanks to Steamforged Games. And also, of course, and subscribe to my channel for more Rivet Wars content, because I'm going to be crazy and just following Rivet Wars nonstop. Thank you guys so much for your time, and again, share this video. It'll help Rivet Wars find its audience in steampunk and dieselpunk board gamers worldwide. And thank you so much to Jamie Perkins. We look forward to what the future will hold.
Thank you.